Thank you, Madam Speaker. With the President to inaugurate and a troubled economy, we can overlook the sacrifice of our troops in Afghanistan. This conflict, overshadowed by Iraq, is often called the Forgotten War. Last month, I became the first member of the House to serve in an imminent danger area since 1942. Now, members of this House have served in all of America's wars from the Revolution through World War II. But the Defense Department's policy of 1943 blocked reservist congressmen from serving in Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Kosovo, or Iraq. Senator and Colonel Lindsey Graham broke through this barrier 2 years ago, and I became the first member of this House to also serve since World War II. While our country has moved from a drafty military to an all-volunteer force, I think it's still important for many Americans, as possible, to share the burden of our troops. Our military is the strongest when it pulls into its ranks Americans from all races, creeds, and colors, and especially all walks of life. It is important for members of this House, where the Constitution places the power to declare war, to also serve alongside our troops. I voted for the deployment of troops to Iraq and Afghanistan, and was honored then to be one of the first to join them in Afghanistan. As a Naval Reserve Intelligence Officer, I deployed to southern Afghanistan in support of NATO's International Security Assistance Force, or ISAF, at the headquarters of Regional Command South. I served in the command of a Dutch Major General, Mark Kirk, and on the staff of his American Deputy for Stabilization, Brigadier General John Nicholson of the U.S. Army. I can report to the House that the morale of our troops in Afghanistan is high. Americans that I joined feel that this is the right mission in the right place. Just because this effort is 10 times harder than we first thought, it remains the place where we can best support the safety of the American people. Our headquarters was located at Kandahar Airfield, known as CAF. We located just a few miles from Tarnak Farms, where Osama bin Laden had trained many al-Qaeda operatives. A few miles further down the road was the palace of Mullah Omar, the murderous former dictator of the Taliban. We faced some real challenges in Afghanistan. Our mission has now stretched for 7 years and can wear thin with the Afghan people. As we look at Senator Barack Obama becoming our commander-in-chief, it's important that we review what we have accomplished in Afghanistan, its differences from the Iraq mission, and what remains to be done. First, it's important to note that Afghanistan is not Iraq, and almost every comparison between the two leads to people making errors with regard to our policy in Afghanistan. While both countries are predominantly Muslim with over 25 million people, there is where the similarities end. Iraq is a country that has always had a strong central government. Afghanistan has always had a certain amount of lawlessness, even during the Soviet dictatorship. Iraq has an oil industry and a middle class. Afghanistan has neither. Iraq was a mission carried out by America and Britain, nearly alone, with few allies helping. Afghanistan is home to a NATO mission, where a very large majority of the troops come from outside America. Finally, the insurgency in Iraq was sustained by dictatorships in Syria and Iran. In Afghanistan, the principal sustainment in income of the Taliban is now heroin, generating billions in profit. Our troops have accomplished a great deal already in Afghanistan. We destroyed al-Qaeda's training bases and then deposed the Taliban dictatorship that protected them. We organized elections and then protected a new democratically elected government under Hamid Karzai. These missions were no small feat in a country that has proved to be the graveyard of the Soviet military and had seen no elections for 3 generations. Since 2006, the mission in Afghanistan has stalled as the Taliban morphed into a new and deadly force. The tenets of Islam are generally anti-narcotic, and the Taliban first eradicated poppy and heroin production, but now has changed its practice. Once the Taliban no longer had easy access to bin Laden or Saudi charity money, they went into the heroin business, big time. Today, they are more accurately described as the narco-Taliban, backed by at least $500 million in annual drug profits. Some of Afghanistan's wealthiest warlords are Taliban leaders who produce heroin to support jihad and terror against the elected government of Afghanistan and the nations of the West. The narco-Taliban are not evenly distributed across Afghanistan. They are concentrated in the heroin heartland of the Helmand River Valley and the nearby city of Kandahar. There is a growing misperception that the war in Afghanistan is fiercest near Pakistan's border. While that may have been true last year, the key to fighting this year is along the heroin river of Helmand in southern Afghanistan. The Afghan government and NATO are fighting pitfalls in the strategic rear of NATO, where support and funding for the Taliban is actually the greatest. Our effort there has been expensive, both in blood and in treasure. In my area, the U.S. has lost over 80 soldiers, but the Canadians have lost over 90, and the British over 110. I cannot emphasize enough the dedication and professionalism and commitment of our troops, and especially our NATO allies. I personally served with British Royal Marine Commandos, with Canadian troops, with Dutch armor officers and enlisted, with Danish armored officers and enlisted, and with Romanian infantry, along with our servicemen and women from the Army, the Marines, the Air Force, and the Navy. I found these troops from the West to be young, idealistic, and some of the most dedicated people I've ever served with. In short, I worked with heroes that I admire a great deal. When I deployed to Afghanistan, I thought I might serve as a FOBIT. A FOBIT is a person who works on a forward operating base, or a FOB, who never leaves its border, who simply shuttles between the chow hall, the office, the gym, and the rack. Thanks to my command, I was not a FOBIT. I spent a great deal of my time outside the wire, in Kandahar, in Gereshk, in Lashkar-Gah, and Kalat. This experience gave me a much greater understanding of the opportunities that we share with NATO and the Afghan government. With all of this effort, we should ask the question, what is at stake in Afghanistan? Should we pull out? Should we stay put? Or should we double down? What is at stake in my view is that the safety of American families is at risk, especially if you live in target cities of New York, Washington, or Chicago. These are the cities emphasized by Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. The dream of many Talib and foreign fighters is to depose the democratically elected government of Afghanistan and then move jihad back into the cities of Europe and the United States. Most of the NATO troops that I met remembered not just 9/11, which they watched on TV, but also the Madrid metro attack, the London bus bombings, and the murder of intellectuals in Amsterdam. They believe, as I do, that the best way to face the Talib is in Afghanistan with Afghan allies that know how to fight them best. Should we keep the mission in Afghanistan as it is today? If we do that, we risk a bloody stalemate that can definitely protect the capital of the Afghan government in Kabul, but would surrender much of the territory of the country to the Talib. The Talib is also wearing our allies thin, especially in Canada and the Netherlands, and it would strain our alliance. The Taliban now attacks young girls who dare to go to school with acid in their face, and assassinated Afghanistan's only female police officer because she was a woman. We know who they are. They are brutal dictators who want to set society back to the 13th century. As Americans, we cannot go back to the 13th century. Our culture and our country doesn't even go back that far. Most Afghans support our values of reform, of rights for women, of the vote, and especially of modernity. But many in Afghanistan, simply to protect their families, want to be with the winning side. And right now, many families in Afghanistan don't know who the winning side will be, the Afghan government and NATO or the Taliban. Should we double down? NATO allies clearly believe that we should double down, but they are waiting for a call from our new president. Our best allies in the UK, in Spain, in France, and in several other NATO countries are already planning to add their troop commitment to Afghanistan. Other close allies of the United States, especially Canada and the Netherlands, need to be asked before making a painful decision for themselves to hang in there. Most expect that the U.S. will be part of a 60,000 troop commitment to Afghanistan, 1/3 of them being Americans, that will then move to attack the heroin production heartland that sustains the Taliban. If this happens, we can expect some tough days ahead. Hard fighting and casualties would ensue. The Taliban cannot survive without the heroin income that comes from this region. If we succeed, we will rip the financial engine from out of the Taliban, securing a future for Central Asia that does not include terror. In the end, we should ask this key question: what is our exit strategy? Currently, the Afghan police and army are much, much smaller than their counterparts in Iraq, a country that has an equal number of people. We need to double the size of Afghanistan's police and army so that they can take this mission from NATO and we can wind up our own effort. It will take at least 2 or 3 years to accomplish this objective, which is why our NATO mission is needed now. I want to thank the men and women that I served with. Our Dutch allies sent us General de Kuyf, and British allies like Brigadier General Hook of the Royal Marine Commandos, both of whom I served with closely. I also want to thank the men that I most closely worked with, Major Will Daniel and Fred Tanner of the U.S. Army. I also want to thank them for their dedication, and I think about them here from the floor each and every day. I especially want to thank my boss, Brigadier General John Nicholson of the U.S. Army. I count myself lucky that at this later stage in my life, I have served, briefly, with such an inspirational leader. To the mothers and fathers of this country, I would say that if your son or daughter serves in southern Afghanistan, they will work under one of the most able military leaders that I have ever met. As we leave Iraq, it is likely that Afghanistan will no longer be the forgotten war. Members of this House should take note that our troops have already accomplished a great deal there, but more remains to be done. For my part, I am honored to have served there and will be, on this House floor, the voice of the troops, the Americans that we have stationed in the land far above the Khyber Pass. And I yield back the balance of my time.